Hi, everybody. Today's presentation is about the Christian attitude towards ownership. So the presentation is really about this idea that Christians are called to consider these three different attitudes when it comes to having stuff. It is a way for us to remember that the previous lessons talked about having too much stuff doesn't allow for us to be completely free and to live a kind of a true life or a life of value. And so this is a way for Christians to consider how it is that we are called to treat stuff, and to remember these three different attitudes will allow for us to live kind of a more fulfilled life. Here's the first slide. So Christians are called to have the following three attitudes: sharing, living simply, and equality. If we can remember those three terms, I will go into detail about each one of them as we go on. The first one is sharing. So sharing is an important Christian attitude because we learn from the Christians, the early Christians, that what they did is that they took their possessions, they sold them all, and they took whatever money they made after they sold all of their kind of too much stuff, and they distributed it among all the people that they hung out with. They distributed it amongst the community. So they didn't hoard their possessions. They didn't have so much stuff, and they didn't put it in a place to show it off. If they had too much stuff, it didn't allow for them to really live in community and live in kind of togetherness and equality with everybody else. So they were never the kind of people who wanted to show off their stuff. If they had stuff, they were able to kind of sell it off and to share equally. So we're called to share in kind of two different ways, and to remember these two is important. One is called fair balance. So Jesus taught us that sharing is an obligation for all of his followers. And so what does sharing really mean? Like, how much are we supposed to give, or how much are we supposed to share? And we're given that answer if we take a look at St. Paul's answer to the question. He says you need to find a fair balance between abundance, and abundance just means huge amounts of wealth, plenty of wealth, and the needs of the community. So how much you're supposed to give isn't a certain kind of amount. Our Catholic and Christian religion doesn't say that we need to give half of everything that we make every paycheck to the poor. It doesn't give us an amount like that. What it has us do is ourself evaluate the balance between having way too much, being super duper wealthy, and thinking about what needs are in the community and what could I give where I'm not now going to be poor. I'm going to be living a good life, a simple life, but I have extra left over that I could certainly donate to make other people's lives better. So think about that. This is a closet. This is J-Lo's closet. She opened up her closet to show a photographer the amount of pants that she owned. And those are the pants on the left. So that would be considered abundance, an over amount of pants or jeans that she owns versus maybe what we need, which is the number of pants on the right. We need a couple of pairs of pants, maybe a couple of different styles, a couple that, you might be able to have one pair or two pairs in the wash and the other pairs you could wear. This makes more sense in terms of fair balance. You don't have too much. If you took a look at how much each of those pants cost in J-Lo's closet, that is a huge amount of money that could have gone towards supporting other things in the community rather than it filling somebody's closet. You could take a look at this further. Some of my students have often said, yeah, but, miss, if we buy those jeans, then what we're doing is we're supporting companies that employ people. Yes, that is true, but we're going to take a look at this from kind of a broader perspective and recognize that now that you have this many pants, think about now you have to get a bigger house to store it all in. And when you get a bigger house to store it all in, you start trying to show off what it is that you have. St. Paul said you cannot force someone to give. This is a really important lesson. What Christians believe is that true sharing is an expression of love and you have to want to do it. It's supposed to be done freely. We never want to force someone to share. We don't say, you must donate this much, or you have to give this, or you must share. Of course, we teach children by giving them examples of sharing, and we might say, wouldn't it be nice for you to share your apple snacks with your friend? But at this point, what we need to remember is that as adults, we're never given an amount that we must share. We have to want to share to be truly free of this idea of being coerced into it. The other part of sharing is to think about our neighbors in need. Jesus calls us to share with our neighbors so that everybody has enough to live in dignity. And so I'm going to have you take a look at the Cafe 541 Eatery and Exchange video. If you've not been there, it's a little cafe on Barton Street, 541 Barton Street, and it talks about how important it is for us to treat people with dignity. If they come into the coffee shop and they don't have exactly enough money to pay for their coffee and a snack, certainly they are not turned away, and there are buttons that they can pay for their snacks with, because that would be treating them with dignity. So you're going to take a look at that video on your own. I'm not going to watch it here with you. Then the next step or attitude is called simplicity. Living a simple life doesn't mean we have to starve and be in poverty and be so simple. Remember the PowerPoint or video that I had you watch about Rob Greenfield? He's the guy who basically has put all of the possessions that he owns into one backpack, and he lives extremely simply. We're not called to be that simple. That is an extreme example of living simply. But we are called to remember to not hoard too much stuff. It means that what we want to do is we want to live resourcefully. We want to have enough in order to be comfortable. We want to work towards being able to keep ourselves comfortable, but what we don't want to do is flaunt it or show it off. So simplicity means neither having too much nor too little, having just enough money to satisfy and not go to extremes. We tend to see that rich people forget God is in charge because they are so consumed with having more stuff and getting more money and being more rich that they start disrespecting creation. They disrespect other people. They think about this idea of making more, getting more, accumulating more as a show of power and a show of good life. But what they then tend to forget is that all of those things are not things that can cover up creation. You know, if they had all these things, but there was no green grass and there was no good weather, they might think of those things a little bit differently. And so we have to remember that. Poor people may be driven to desperate behavior like stealing. And so what we don't want to do is in our own behaviors support rich people getting rich. This is when we idolize people who are so rich and go, oh, I would love to be like them. Or we don't do anything to help poor people from being poor. And we only make it worse for them. And when we make it worse for them, it causes them to go to extreme behaviors like having to steal to have food. And we don't want to have our own behaviors influence either extreme, the rich getting richer or the poor being poorer, because that will lead to extreme behaviors on their part. So to think about simplicity, we want to live simply in order to be able to live free. So we do not want to have too much. Too much means we end up worrying with everything that we have. Then you have to insure the stuff that you have. You have to buy a bigger house. Everything becomes a bigger worry. And so having too much is actually not freeing. It ends up being very debilitating. It keeps you kind of a prisoner to your stuff. Unfortunately, in our society, it's not easy to sort out what's a necessary, what's a luxury, and what's just plain silly, because we have marketers trying to get us to have more stuff. So take a look at this next slide. Is the Bratz dolls on the left unnecessary? Do we need to have it? Is it a luxury? Like, oh, that would be just so nice to have because it would just make my life that much better? Or is it just silly? And in this case, I labeled this as just silly. You know, having dolls to play with or toys to play with is one thing, but having tons of dolls to play with is just silly. Do you need all of them? Whereas a backpack on the right might be considered necessary. Even a good quality knapsack might be considered unnecessary. The next slide shows us the difference between a luxury and a necessary. Super duper crazy expensive shoes are a luxury. They're not necessarily what we need. So necessary, we need shoes. Luxury shoes are kind of a show-off item. And if you have too many of them, then you're really showing off. Saving up and getting one luxury item, that's kind of cool, where you've kind of supported yourself and went, you know what, I worked really hard. This is a luxury item. It's one. But having a whole collection of them, too much. So, can you give examples of how students might sometimes want things that are luxury or silly rather than what is needed? Consider things like school supplies, clothing, home stuff like candles or pillows or things for your room, sports equipment. Consider those examples for the test. The last attitude is equality. There should not be any discrimination based on social class. We need to consider that the rich shouldn't be treated better than the poor. Jesus calls us to consider about equality amongst the community. We don't want to take a look at rich people and give them better service. When they walk into a store, do you run to them first as a server and go, oh, they are fully nicely dressed, I better give them better service because they'll probably spend more money? Or if they walk into a restaurant, do I seat them first because they are special people? We don't want to give preferential treatment to anybody who seems to be rich. Everybody's a human. Everybody deserves the same kind of equal treatment. So St. James warned us against making distinctions between rich and poor. And he reminds us that the big way to stop being like that is to treat others the way you would want to be treated yourself. So love your neighbor as yourself. We can't let those that don't have much continue to not have much. We need to strive on our own to try to make sure that those who don't have much are somehow given an extra helping so that we're all at least even. That's working with dignity. So, here's an example of how Cafe 541 Eatery and Exchange, you watched the first video earlier in the PowerPoint presentation. Here's the next one, and it kind of tells you how the cafe hasn't closed to the people who desperately might need a little bit of extra. And this is a great little Hamilton Community Cathedral Community Cafe. It is accessible to all of us. So consider that and read this or watch this particular video. And then the last slide that you're going to see is our review slide. And so the review allows us to remember what it is that we learned in this PowerPoint. Can you name the 3 attitudes that Christians are called to have when we think about owning stuff? Can you explain what it truly means to live simply? It doesn't mean to live and show off that you're poor and say, I don't have anything. Look, I don't have anything, and promote it. It's a different thing. Can you explain it? Can you give an example of some kind of behavior that people participate in that supports the rich getting richer? Think about who owns an iPhone, who makes the money with the iPhones. Every time that you get an iPhone, are you supporting the people who own iPhone, who own Apple, who are Apple company owners? Are we making their life even better? And does Apple give back to the community? Think about that one. And then how does wanting to share come from a different place in your heart than being told that you have to share? Can you explain the difference? Hope this presentation helped you out. This is the last presentation of the entire unit. The unit quiz is coming up on the LMS. Good luck, everybody, and have a great weekend.